Happy to be here.
Sweet.
Happy to be here.
It's all you.
All right, let's get started. This is going to be really informal. So I don't do this for a living, but I don't mind getting up here and telling you a little bit about what I do, telling you a little bit about my career, and trying to get you, a little bit more educated on real estate and site selection, some of the tools we use, and how we go about business. So if you look me up on LinkedIn, you know that I've been at Lee & Associates for about 5 years. Prior to that, I spent 23 with Giant Food Stores, primarily based in Carlisle. I started at the very, very bottom rung of their real estate department in property management and lease administration, and when I left, I was the vice president of real estate. Nothing bad to say about them. It was just time for us to part ways and for me to do something different. Great company to work for. I learned a ton, and they invested a lot in me. So you might stop for a second and say, whoa, he can stand up in front of a whole group of people and talk. They paid for that. It didn't come natural. It did not come naturally. So 25 plus, it's getting closer to 30, but who's counting? A little bit about me. I spent, I think it was 10 days at the Harvard Business School in Ahold Leadership Academy, Ahold Retail Academy at Babson. We simulated supermarket expansion. Dale Carnegie, that's the class I talked about where they really focused on public speaking. And I have a Bachelor of Science in Accounting from Penn State many, many, many years ago. Giving back is pretty important to me. It's part of why I'm here. Spent a lot of time with the National MS Society. I have a cousin that's my age that has MS. She is just about at the point where she's in a wheelchair full time. So it was a passionate kind of thing for me. Still raise money for them, even though I've stepped off the board, and you can see the other stuff. Here's a list of some of my clients since I've gotten into the business, or shared clients. I work as part of a team. I would say the team leader on our team, John Van Buskirk, has over 30 years of commercial brokerage experience. And his son is on our team. He is a licensed CPA who's got his license in reserve right now and working with us quite successfully, as a matter of fact. Let's see, point out Matrix. If you all drive up and down 81 south of here, I think you got to get down to about exit 24. You'll see a big building that says Walmart on it. And you'll see a big building right next to it that says Amazon on it. And you'll see a big building right next to that that says Lowe's. Matrix developed all three of those buildings. I was a part of the leasing team for 2 of the 3. MRP Industrial, similarly, they've got a project down at State Line Road that's standing, ready to be leased. If you know anybody that needs 1 million feet, bring them to me. But just some clients. This is the adage about real estate, right? You can't have a real estate presentation that doesn't have a slide in it that says location, location, location. Does it matter? I mean, if I put a grocery store on this corner, or I put a grocery store 3 corners down, if I put a warehouse in this state, or I put a warehouse in that state, does it matter? Well, let's look at cost. 55,000 square foot supermarket. These are pretty accurate numbers. I just had a former colleague of mine help me out with some information. By the time you get it all in, cost of the building, the cost of the equipment, the inventory, 20 years worth of rent, it's a $37 million investment. It doesn't include how much you spend to hire people and train them. It doesn't include the overhead, the utilities, the common area maintenance, the taxes on the facility itself over that 20-year period? Does it matter? 37 million reasons why it matters. Another example, an industrial building, 600,000 square feet. Call it mid-size for our area, large for some areas. About a $94 million investment. Again, doesn't include the expense of hiring, overhead, utilities, maintenance, taxes, just the investment. So location matters, because if you get it wrong, the shareholders are going to be pissed as you wasted that much money. So you got to get it right. So there's tools. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the grocery store business, but there's a couple things that I want to tell you about. So this is what we call a customer spotting map. It's out of Virginia, Alexandria. You could see this was a giant Landover store, 242, and we had a site to evaluate just up the street. Each of the dots represents a customer. The different colors of dots represent customers from different stores. And the shading behind represents growth. So, how do we get this? You know, every time you walk up to the cash register, a giant asks you for your bonus card. That's how we get this. That's how we get this. Every time you walk up to the register at Best Buy and they ask you for your phone number, that's how they get this, because they grab your address associated with your phone number. It's why websites ask you for your email address. It's why they ask you for your information, because they want to know who you are, where you're coming from, how to serve you better, how to target ads to you. We'll get into that a little bit more. But we utilize this to understand when you pull a sample. We don't pull every customer for a store. We pull a sample of customers per store. And what we want to understand is, if we build a new store here, theoretically a bigger, better, brighter, shinier store here, how much are we going to impact the other stores that we have in the market? Ours, as well as the competition. You can see a Harris Teeter site referenced up there. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, because I think the guest speaker that you have coming from Panera is probably going to spend more time talking about this kind of stuff. But it's really cool. In the olden days, yes, when I first got into the business, it was the olden days. The way we did this was, when a customer came in the front door, there would be a person standing there with a map and a marker. And they would ask the customer to help them find where their house was on the map. And they would put a dot on the map. That's how far we've come. Today, the bonus card's important, and they still use it because it gives them a clear picture of who their customer is. So, you know, who's Giant's customer? But if you think about it, that's all the bonus card really gets you. Technology's further evolved now. Now I can identify my customers and their customers, because everybody's carrying a cell phone. We'll talk about that more. I don't want to make it sound like cell phones are bad. That's probably not the right thing. But this is a cool tool, geofencing. And I knew about it from the retail side, but when I made the transition to industrial, I brought the concept with me. Nobody else was doing it. And so it's been something that set us apart for a period of time. Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. So we innovate things in our business, and then they get copied. We need to innovate again. But this is an example of us putting a geofence around a warehouse for a client. And you'd say, well, the client already knows who their employees are. You're right. But they don't necessarily know where all their employees are driving from, how far they drive. So we can use an analysis like this to help a client determine, if I move to a different location, what impact is it going to have on my workforce? And labor is critical right now. It's hard to find. Really hard to find. I think the unemployment rate in the state of Pennsylvania for the last month it was reported was 3.4%, and that's the lowest it's ever been. So what else can we do with this? Our marketing team uses it. We'll put a geofence on an industry event. And while people are attending that event, we can hit them with ads for our business. We know where they are. They're a captive audience. We've used this to support a landlord client. So this one was done for a specific user that we were working with. So we're representing the tenant or the user in that case. But we also use the same technology to benefit a landlord. So I'll give you a good example. We were working to support a landlord who had a lease extension coming up with their tenant. And they were concerned that the tenant might leave the building and wanted to know what the risk of that was, because there are a couple other buildings within a reasonable drive time that they could move to. Well, we put the geofence on the building, and we found out that all of the employees were coming from the southern end of the market, driving north to get to this particular building. The competitive buildings that they could potentially move to were all north and northeast of their current spot. So they were going to really inconvenience their workforce if they moved. So helping the landlord better understand what their tenant's position is in the building gives them leverage in the negotiations on the lease extension. Kind of cool. So there's a lot of different tools out there that we use to vet the location, help our client understand it better and what the ramifications are of being in a particular spot. One last thing on this, and I'm going to talk a good bit about a project that we did for another client, but we used similar technology. They were evaluating potentially building a warehouse in a particular market. And the primary employer was quarter mile, half mile down the street, also operating a warehouse. Well, we put a geofence on that warehouse because we wanted to understand where their labor was coming from, so that our client could basically put an overlay of that labor travel on their building to determine how much labor was left in that same market, if that makes sense. So if they're driving an hour to get to an existing warehouse, likely to drive an hour to get to a new warehouse. That's probably the best way to frame that up. That's what it looks like in Google Earth. Basically, we're just showing a 15, a 30, a 45, and a 60 plus drive time in minutes. Great visual when you're on a Zoom meeting with a client and you can pop that up and share your screen. Yeah, we use a little bit of technology. Just a little bit. So I'm going to jump in and talk about a project that we did for a client. I'm not going to name the client. But we've done a lot of work for them. And they needed, actually my partner has done 4 warehouses for them. This slide was developed as part of doing the 4th warehouse. And it provides a pretty good picture of the process that we go through when we start to look at selecting a site for a client if we're talking about warehouse distribution. So typically they have a sense of, in general, what part of the country they need to supply. They don't necessarily know where exactly they want it to be. So there's a number of things that go into it. So we started by reaching out to state economic development corporations. I think you said you had Mike Ross in, right? So people like that, other places. And we got, I think it's 135. It's on the next slide. I think we got 135 site submittals. And we vet them. Talk about that a little bit more in a minute. That was across 4 states. And we start paring them down, until ultimately we get to a final recommended site, final site selection, document it, and it has to be built. So this project will deliver, meaning the client will be able to move into it and start to fill it with product in April of 2025. I started working on it in late 2021. Let me tell you a really cool thing about being a real estate agent. You get paid when the project's done. So you start working on it in 2021. Now, I'm lying a little bit. We got paid half of our fee when they bought the land. We'll get paid the other half of our fee when they physically move into the space. So yeah, 135 sites, 4 states. Here's our parameters: 50 plus acres, less than 4 miles to the interstate. Client determined that they wanted to own the location, so we're not talking to anybody that only wants to lease. And site dimensions, 1,100 by 2,000. State, county, and local EDCs, driving tours, CoStar, LoopNet. That's like a multi-list for commercial real estate. Broker interviews, contacts that we have. Lee and Associates is a national platform, so we have offices in other parts of the country. Test fit, basically taking their building and making sure it'll fit on the site. Got to look at wetlands, got to look at floodplain, got to look at access. We had some really good sites that we identified out in this market, not far from an interstate. But access would come off of a 4-lane divided highway with no signalization. Now, in your Honda Accord, it's not really a big deal. But when you have a fully loaded semi and they need to make a left turn across 2 lanes, there's not enough room in the median for them to stop, and then they've got 2 more lanes to navigate to make that left-hand turn, it's problematic. So these are the kinds of things that we use to down select sites. And last thing up there, utilities. So got to have water, got to have sewer, got to have gas, got to have electric. We pared the 135 down to 7 sites across 3 states. And then we went and met with them. This is the map I told you about. This is an optimized network for the client. So the dots are stores or projected stores. The lines are distribution routes, and the labels are where, effectively, roughly where the DCs will land. is a whole nother industry in and of itself. This is not something we do. We utilize us and our client utilize the third party to create this. So we have 7 sites, we have 3 states. Deep dive on variable transportation costs. So that's that map I just showed you. Where's the product coming into the country from? How's it getting to the DC? Is it getting there by truck? Is it getting there by rail? Is it getting there by some combination of the two? Execution risk. They know what day they want to be shipping product out of that facility. Part of our job is making sure that we can hit that date. We need to know we can get entitlements. We need to know we can get the facility built. We need to know the facility can be delivered in time to meet their needs. Why? In this particular case, because this company is already opening retail stores that need to be serviced from this DC. And they're servicing them from other DCs in the meantime, but it's costing them a lot of money because they've got extra transportation costs to get from the DC to the retail location. Site-specific challenges, we do, and this, again, through a third party, soil borings, deeper dive on wetlands, deeper dive on any other environmental hazards that might be there. Fortunately, we ran into a lot of farmland, so we weren't dealing with a lot of environmental issues. And then I talked a little bit about the labor research. And we get people here. Client site visits, community meetings, meetings with elected officials, planning and zoning, city engineers, the geotech analysis. Let's see what's not included in there. Meeting with all the utility companies. On our site visit, basically we pile into a room a little bit like this, and we have everybody around the table just answering questions. Just answering questions. How long is it going to take us to get power? How much is it going to cost? How long is it going to take us to get sewer? How much is it going to cost? What are limitations on the existing sewer facility? Because you got to know those things. Fortunately, this isn't a heavy sewer user, but we do deal with clients that, like I'm dealing with a project right now, and we represent the owner of a building. We have a prospective tenant, but they need 125,000 gallons a day in water, and that results in 125,000 gallons a day in sewer output. They operate a recycle operation, recycling plastics. So it's an important question that we need to have answered. Do we have enough EDUs? Do we have enough sewer to make this happen? Construction cost comparison against the finalist sites, and then we also looked at variable costs. One thing that's not up here is incentives. We had engaged a third party on behalf of our client to look at incentives. And so they had contact with all of the states around how much money would be invested, how many jobs they would create, what kind of training those jobs would get, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And each of the states was given an opportunity to put an incentives package together to attract our client. Some of the states just tell you right off the bat, they'll say, look, you're gonna get a great deal on the land, but beyond that, you're not gonna see much in the way of incentives. Maybe some job training credits, but not gonna see much. Other states rolled out the red carpet. And the site that we ultimately selected, that state put $18 million worth of incentives on the table to attract our client to come there. They'll be paid out over a 10-year period. It's mostly real estate tax abatement. So we talked about multi-state market recon, and we talked about outreach to the state EDC, Broad spectrum site identification, I think that really encompasses both of those prior things. Center of gravity analysis, outbound. Didn't really touch on that. We talked about the map, those pseudo stores. Well, obviously this is planning for stores that don't exist yet. So they utilize their target demographic profile based on existing operations, and they identify likely areas for stores and then drop a pin. That information then goes to St. Ange, who's the transportation company, and they take a look at all of those locations and they work to optimize where the facility should be located to support outbound flow. Outbound flow. So that's the first piece. Qualitative site assessments, we talked about that. How does it fit? And does it fit? And is it a reasonable site? We had sites submitted to us that were the right width, the right length, so the right dimensions, within 4 miles of the interstate, generally flat, all utilities available, but there's a stream running through the middle of it. I can't build over it, and it's not big enough to build on one side of it or the other. So those are the kinds of things that we take out. Workforce benchmarks. We know or knew how many people would be, roughly how many people would be employed by the facility. And again, third-party consultant, because it's not our area of expertise, they looked at the geography and started looking at states and saying, where do we have a labor profile that starts to make sense? Are there parts of these states that we just, too rural, not going to get enough people, those kinds of things. So workforce benchmarks are established, and then we utilize a third party to evaluate sites. Comparative transportation analysis, short list sites. This is really, it's not labeled this way, but that's really the inbound. So we got to a place where we have a general geography that says, this is where we want to be to service these locations from an outbound perspective. But now we really need to refine the analysis. And inbound is critical because everything's coming inbound. And in this particular case, 40% of inbound is coming from overseas. So it's got to come into Port of LA, it's got to come into the Port of Houston, it's got to come into the Port of Savannah, and then it's got to make its way to the Midwest. What's the most efficient way to make that happen? Rail. Based on that, we started refining the analysis and working to get closer to rail service so that basically we could pick this product up at an intermodal yard and get it to the facility without trucking it across country. We created the benchmarks for workforce, and then with the short list of sites, we could turn GLS, the workforce consultant, loose and say, profile these 7 markets and give us a comparison across the 7 markets and tell us where we have enough people. And a little bit of science to that, if you're familiar with a demographic run. Do you think there's a lot of people working in warehouses that are 60 or over? No. Do you think there's a lot of people with college degrees that are working in warehouses? Not too many. So what happens is you start to break into that demographic profile, and you can start to take out certain demographic identifiers, and you can really start to hone in on what your likely warehouse worker is and how many of them there are based on income, based on education, based on age. We get all of that together and we down select. So that's how we went from 7 to basically 2. We went out to 2 GCs, one that had been in tow on the project for a long time, and another who was basically their #1 competitor, and said, here we go. Let's see what this looks like. At the same time, there's those incentive pieces coming into the mix. And then the incentive offers come. And then we're in the market, and we're having those 90-minute, 2-hour meetings with everybody at the table, because we're trying to break those sites. Fail fast in our business, because you can't afford to fail slowly. We got to take the client there. Got to get their buy-in. Got to get them, they got to feel it, touch it, kick the dirt, talk to the mayor. They got to come. And then we prepared a total cost analysis. No magic in this, right? Just got to be comparing apples to apples. That's the part that Leo excels at, our CPA on the team. Land for land, construction for construction, incentives for incentives, labor, transportation costs, what's the delta between this site and that site? All those pieces have to get factored in. So at the end of the day, you can look at the client. The client has analysis that they have to take to their board of directors. By the way, that's where this slide came from, was the board of directors presentation. Got to give the board confidence in the fact that we were thorough in what we did, right? That's how we got here. And we made a final site selection. It was agonizing. It really was. It was agonizing. We thought we were done, and then we weren't done. Then we were done, and it still took us a long time to document it. In this particular case, we were buying the site from a government entity. That creates challenges. They technically can't enter into a non-disclosure agreement. So I have a publicly traded company who doesn't want to announce their 4th DC and its location yet, but I've got to go to city council to get their approval to sell us the land, and that's a public meeting. Yeah, as soon as you think you're done, you're not done. You got more work to do. So we were able to disclose the buyer without it necessarily becoming public, basically. You dive into final site due diligence and entitlements kind of right along with that project documentation. So we submitted for permits, submitted plans. In this particular case, this state and this municipality were incredible to work with. We submitted plans in September, and we had 95% of our approvals and site development permits before Christmas. In the state of Pennsylvania, at a minimum, that takes 2 years. very, very different environment in the Midwest. We had a building permit by February, and we needed a permit to drill under the road, under a state road, to extend a water line, and that took us until like sometime in January to get it. So all in all, call it September to early February to be fully permitted with building permits. Can't happen in the eastern part of the U.S. I don't want to just pick on Pennsylvania, but it just can't happen in the eastern part of the U.S. And there's a bunch of valid reasons why. The Chesapeake Bay is one of them, right? So there's reasons why, but in the state of Pennsylvania, it's very, very difficult. A lot of red tape. Physical construction's underway. See a picture of that in a minute. Material commitments, so that's the, when this project was happening, there were a number of construction materials that were really, really hard to come by. Steel was one, we had to order that early. Roofing material wasn't hard to come by, but they wouldn't guarantee you a delivery date, and they wouldn't guarantee you a price until they delivered it to the site. Makes it hard to budget for a project, doesn't it? You need 2 million, or in this case, 600,000 square feet of roofing material. Can't tell you how much it's going to cost until it lands on the site. All of that's pretty much settled down. Right now, the one wild card in construction is electrical equipment, switchgear and transformers. Their lead time is anywhere from 12 to 18 months. So you need to be ordering it about the same time you put the shovel in the ground, or sooner if you can. And that's, I'm told, driven by the Inflation Reduction Act. There's language that was put in that changed certain materials that could be used in the manufacturing of that type of equipment. No one told the industry it was changing. No one told the manufacturers it was changing. They simply put it in the bill and they changed it. And so when the bill was adopted, everything came to a screeching halt. And those companies had to basically retool and start over. Physical construction's underway. MHE, material handling equipment, will start to install latter part of November in about half of the building, while the contractor's finishing the other half of the building. And then the way this is supposed to work is the contractor moves out the end, and the MHE guy is following right behind him. And the building will be delivered in, I think, April. Expect to start putting product in it probably sometime the beginning of May, and they'll be shipping the stores in June. Anything I missed that I was supposed to cover?
No. Supposed to? No, there's no supposed to. I just wanted you guys to see, one, is how long the timelines are. Two, how many steps there are. And how many different people with different skill sets are participating in that process. You got your, like you said, you got your accountants, you got your engineers, you got your planners, you have your tax specialists. And then when you get to the physical construction, you've got your geotechnical folks who are poking holes in the ground and checking the soil and checking, can it compact, can it hold the weight of the building. So everything we're doing in these majors fits in this S-curve, just in a different spot. So, what Anthony will be doing will fit somewhere, a little different. When Josh will be doing will fit somewhere. So every time we see a graphic like this, it brings the message home that even though you guys are in different majors and may go off to do different things, it's very likely you're going to bump into each other 3, 4, 10 years down the road, when all of a sudden you're working on a project and your skill sets are being brought to the same table, where you're hashing it out with someone like Bill, answering questions.
The industry is really dynamic. I always tell people that if you want to be in a job that's exactly the same every day, real estate's not for you. There's no two deals that are alike. There's no two clients that are alike. There's no two sites that are alike. It's just always something different. In my career, I've just seen so many different parts of the business. So I told you I started in property management and lease administration. Yeah, I was the guy that was hiring the landscaper, and I was the guy that was reading the lease and make sure we paid the rent on time. And then one day the president of the company said, I want to get in the gas business. So you see giant gas stations. I built the first half of those gas stations. And I headed up a cross-functional team that cut across the whole organization: marketing, advertising, product merchandising, product procurement, the whole 9 yards. And was very instrumental in getting us in the gas business. I probably have, if I have one, I probably have 10 or 12 handwritten notes from Tony Schiano, who was the CEO of the company, I still have them, saying, more, faster. Bottom line, more, faster. Parlayed that into store expansions. It's an animal of itself, right? You want the space next door, but there's a tenant in it. Now you got to make a deal through the landlord with that tenant to move them. Snow loads come into factor. Yeah, engineering, it rears its head again. To new stores and site selection for new stores. The time in the DC market, which was the last roughly three and a half years of my career, that was very interesting, because it's different to build a giant in a cornfield. Think about the giant here in Shippensburg. That was a cornfield before we built that store. In DC, I was building stores on city blocks where we were excavating two levels down to build parking. It would take us a year just to get back to grade before we went vertical. And then imagine my surprise when somebody put a plan in front of me one day that showed 4 stories of residential above our store and a swimming pool on the roof. Now remember, I was a property manager, so I'm thinking about roof leaks. And I'm going, wait a minute, how do we accomplish this? They do it all the time. It works. We built some. So there's, as you move around industries and you move around geographies, the job changes. And what you get exposed to changes. Warehouses, for example, might look at it and go, so what? We joke. It's a big concrete building. Last Wednesday, we had a broker tour all along I-81. Started in Martinsburg, finished in Chambersburg. We visited 6 buildings. If you've seen the inside of one 600, 700, 800, 900,000, a million or $1.2 million square foot warehouse building, you've seen the inside of virtually all of them. They look the same. It's a concrete structure, steel columns in the middle that hold the roof up. But what's really cool is that floor is dead flat. So when you build a warehouse building, you have to grade a tabletop that's over, if you're building 1 million square feet, you need to grade a tabletop that's over 1 million square feet that's flat. If you're building a 60,000 square foot supermarket, you only need a 60,000 square foot tabletop. It's a lot easier to soak up the grade. And a warehouse makes it a little bit more complicated because then you need a 4-foot elevation change from the finished floor of the building to the bottom of the parking lot. That's the difference between where the truck parks and the level of the truck to get in and out. So not only do you need a 1 million square foot tabletop, but then it has to drop off on both sides. So there really are some unique things that as you get into it, you learn different pieces. It's just dynamic. So if you're thinking about a career in real estate, I've had a great run at 30 years, and I'd highly recommend it. But if you're thinking about getting into a niche that fits in this, yeah, I'd recommend that too. Because you'll see different pieces of it along the way.
Eric? All right, let's do this off, Eric.
Right, so you all watched the COVID-19 pandemic cause a shift toward online consumerism and how it increased demand for transportation and warehousing. So we're wondering if that shift and its ripple effects are still happening across the industry sectors you serve, and can you give us your perspectives on these shifts?
It was big. It really had a major impact on industrial real estate, and it moved rents, I'm going to say, in the core central Pennsylvania market from $550 a foot to $9 a foot in 18 months, 2 years. Why? Supply and demand. If you haven't had economics yet, good luck. But yeah, supply and demand. Lots of demand, limited supply. Some of that was driven by the fact that you had developers put projects on hold because of the uncertainty in pricing materials. Some of that was because you simply had work that couldn't get done. You know, if it wasn't seen as being critical, life-saving, medical related, there was a period of time they weren't letting construction contractors work. So we had a period of time in 2022, mid-2022, where we just simply had no space to lease. We had to find about 100,000 square feet for a client. They only needed it temporarily, and we leaned on a lot of relationships to make something available, because the owner of the building knew that if he took a temporary tenant, he risked not, having to pass up something that would be more lucrative. That might be a 3-year deal or a 5-year deal or a 7-year deal. It's changed somewhat. Demand has definitely slowed down, but it's sort of starting to pick back up, I'd say, over the course of the last 60 days. But we've got some interesting things happening with interest rates climbing. A lot of the capital that would normally invest in what we refer to as spec development. So we're going to build a building and then we're going to lease it, spec development. We don't have a tenant until we pretty much have the building done. A lot of that capital has decided to move to the sidelines because they don't know where rates are going. So it's hard to make an investment analysis knowing you want to generate a rate of return, but yet you don't know what the money is going to cost you by the time you've got it all deployed. So we're seeing construction starts drop. That means supply is starting to wane. And demand, I just mentioned, is starting to pick back up. So in certain markets, Central PA being one of them, Lehigh Valley being one of them, we expect those markets to tighten over the course of the next year, and we'll probably see some more upward pressure on rents due to a lack of space. There's other markets, for example, southern New Jersey, there's a glut of space. It's going to take a long time for it to get absorbed based on demand rates. Southern I-81 corridor from Hagerstown to Martinsburg. I told you we were on a tour Wednesday. We saw somewhere around 6.5 million square feet of space that's either complete or will deliver sometime, let's say in the next 90 to 120 days. Most of it's already delivered, and there's at least another 3 million square feet of space that's already delivered in that same corridor. Somebody's gonna blink, right? All of a sudden, the tenant's gonna come to that market, they're gonna need 600,000 square feet, and somebody's gonna do something aggressive with their rent number. And then it sort of sets the bar in the market, resets the bar in the market, because there's so much space there right now. So I didn't really bring materials to talk about this. Next year, you gotta send me the questions ahead, and then I could bring you some stuff and show you. But yeah, we're in a funny place right now. We're in, I would say in late 21 to mid 22, I would have said markets were really consistent. Clicks and clicks, 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 a lot of e-commerce. Now we've got some separation in the different markets, and some of that's just based on land availability. There's just not that much land left in Central PA.
You up next?
Yeah. Alright, so according to the data we've seen recently, Pennsylvania's transportation and warehousing sectors have been growing at rates faster than the state's economy as a whole. So there's a couple questions with this. How has the growth rate affected your business in the past 20 years? Is this rapid growth rate sustainable? And is Pennsylvania still attractive to firms in the trucking and warehousing sector as it was during its early 2000s?
Let's work backwards, and I might need you to refresh some of those questions for me. Pennsylvania will always be, and I'm going to say central and eastern Pennsylvania, will always be attractive to warehouse distribution trucking industry. You can reach 90% of the East Coast population within 3.5 or 4 hours. And the road network rocks. I-81, I-78, I-76, 22, 322, 84 coming out of northeastern PA, 380 running over to Jersey up there. It's unparalleled. Access into Baltimore via I-83 to I-95 into DC. It's what drives the market. So forever. It's not going to change, because you would need mass exodus of people away from the East Coast. It's simply not going to happen. I think the question in the middle was about affecting the business over the last 20 years. I guess I'm going to say I can't answer that, because I wasn't in this business 20 years ago. Lee and Associates of Eastern Pennsylvania, the company that I work for, has been around for 7 years. The two founding principals prior to that were at JLL, which is a big publicly traded real estate brokerage firm. And prior to that, John, my partner, was at a local company called NAICIR, based in Harrisburg. He's been doing this for 30 years, and he's made a career primarily out of industrial real estate. So, e-commerce growth coming out of the pandemic is unprecedented. Can't sustain those levels, but I believe we'll get back to a normal level, which is still crushing it compared to many, 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 many other places in the U.S. So the greater Philadelphia industrial market, which we're a part of in Central PA, is the second largest industrial market in the entire country. Central PA is the largest sub-market in that greater Philadelphia marketplace. The largest industrial market is California, city industry, LA, because of the product that's coming in out of the ports. So we're in a good spot. You want to be in the industrial real estate business? This is a place to be in the industrial real estate business. The other places, effectively the greater Atlanta market, Dallas, Fort Worth, generally Chicago, California we talked about, and then the Pacific Northwest. If you're a big company and you need a distribution plan for the U.S., assuming a 6-facility network, this is what it looks like. Some people only get to 5, and they never get the Pacific Northwest.
Alrighty, so I've got the next one. So earlier this semester, we spoke with Mike Ross from the SCADC, and he shared some things that stuck with us. For example, Mr. Ross expressed some concern about the future as he imagined a time when the trucking and warehousing sectors would move on, which would leave our region trying to figure out how to reuse or repurpose all these properties with massive warehouses. I guess you kind of just said that we're always going to have a lot of trucking, but are you seeing any evidence of this era ending, and do you have any recommendations for what to do with all these properties when that time comes?
I don't see that time coming. And I'll tell you why. You're all the reason. What don't you buy off your phone? What don't you buy off your phone? Right? I mean, you order takeout, you order Amazon, you order Walmart, today's Wayfair days. If you need new bedding for your dorm, it's just, and the pandemic supercharged moving people in that direction. So prior to the pandemic, I didn't order laundry detergent online, but we kind of do now. A lot of people I know, my wife's not one of them, but a lot of people I know never would have thought to buy groceries online. They like to go grocery shop. They like to pick their produce, want to touch the apples and the melons and the meat and all that stuff. I know a lot of people now that shop for their groceries online, and they go pick them up. They just pull in and come out to the car and pick them up. So I just don't see us moving away from that. I think there's still more growth to occur with that kind of stuff. And now I see commercials from, I forget if it's Lowe's or Home Depot, about you being in the middle of a project, putting tile in a bathroom or painting walls in your living room and running out of paint, and they'll deliver product to you same day. The more of that we have, the more demand there is for same-day delivery, the more demand we have for warehouse space. Because frankly, the warehouse has to be closer to the customer. You can't get it there today. So I don't see it. I would respectfully disagree with Mike. But what are we doing with dead malls? Turning them into warehouses. What are we doing with, dead office buildings? We're turning them into apartment complexes. I don't know what we're going to turn warehouse buildings into if it comes to that, but it's probably a use that we haven't thought of yet.
Okay, I have the next question. In my experience, living next to a new warehouse can bring down the neighboring property values, especially where they create traffic congestion and light pollution. So can you share with us anything about the pushbacks or regulations, if any, that are limiting where a warehouse can be built?
Lots of opposition to warehouse development. Some of it successful, some of it unsuccessful. And I think most developers attempt to be community oriented and friendly when it comes to neighboring properties, as far as screening, as far as, most developers really want to put their building right off the exit. Think about Shippensburg. I mean, you come right off the exit, you go right in the industrial park, you've got 4.5, 5 million square feet of space. You really limit the impact to people. But one of the challenges that we have in the state of Pennsylvania is there are 2,600 different municipalities in the state of Pennsylvania. Townships, boroughs, towns, cities, name it. 2,600 of them. And under the municipality's planning code, now I'm wearing my land use attorney hat, they each can establish their own zoning map, and they each can establish their own zoning ordinance. So they can decide what they want to permit, where and how they want to permit it. The one caveat is they have to permit every use. They can't exclude anything. So every municipality has to permit warehouse and manufacturing someplace. Every municipality has to permit an adult bookstore someplace, or a grocery store someplace. It doesn't mean that it has to be a vacant piece of land that will allow for development of that use. It just means it has to be covered by the ordinance as permitted. So if there's already a building on that site, and that's the only site where you can have an adult bookstore, they've met the requirements of the ordinance. The use is permitted. If somebody who wants to run an adult bookstore wants to buy that property, tear down the existing structure, and build there, they can. But the problem with the 2,600 municipalities is we don't get a lot of regional planning. So Chambersburg Borough says, well, I'm gonna put my warehouses over here. And Shippensburg Borough says, well, I'm gonna put my warehouses over here. Shippensburg Township says, I'm gonna put my warehouses over here. They're not necessarily working together. So rather than clustering them, sometimes we end up with a warehouse over here. And then we end up in a warehouse that's kind of maybe a little bit off the beaten path because the property was zoned right. And the municipalities don't want to change the zoning because people come out and complain about it. So there's sometimes logic doesn't prevail in those conversations. And a good example, we had a client put a piece of property under agreement in the Carlisle area. Tons of warehouses. Tons of warehouses right around the corner from this site. Across the street, there was a warehouse. That warehouse was in a different municipality. Next door to this site is a cemetery. The opposite side of the site and north of the site, both of the farms are in a conservation easement. So they're never going to be developed. Less than somewhere between a quarter mile and a half mile of leaving the site, all truck traffic would be out of the municipality and into yet a third neighboring municipality, and would be on the interstate less than a mile from the site. All the residents came out in opposition to that development. The absolute most logical place in that municipality to put a warehouse. All the tax revenue, which the township needs, none of the traffic, no neighbors close enough to matter. People that are dead, I'm not going to wake them up, right? Right next to a warehouse. Nope, not going to happen. Just not going to happen. So I do think we have situations where warehouses get built in places that aren't ideal. But it's because the land's zoned that way. Excuse me. And you can't get it changed.
I think you just made a plug for Dr. Conroy's course. Who's up next?
My question is, it seems like Pennsylvania is growing rapidly in terms of jobs, yet we are growing at the 6th lowest rate in terms of population. Also, Pennsylvania contains the 2nd highest percentage of retired adults. So we are curious, what are some consequences of these population trends, and is your industry looking for any solutions?
Labor is really hard to come by for warehouse users. And you saw in the slide that number. Steel racking, sure, but a lot of conveyor belts, a lot of technology, a lot of stuff to limit the amount of human labor, human capital that has to go into it. Amazon is a leader in technology as far as fulfillment goes without necessarily having to be touched. There's a big Walmart facility down in Greencastle that you can see from I-81. It's 3 stories tall. That's a fully automated facility. So yeah, people are moving that way because they don't have a choice. They don't have a choice. And it's not just here. It's everywhere. So.
Good. Time for one more? Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah. The last question here.
All right. So many of us in this class are majoring or minoring in earth science or sustainability, which means that we all share concerns about natural resources and natural landscapes and are interested in preserving some for our future generations. Does your company have a commitment to sustainability? And if so, how are you going about it?
We plant a tree for every deal we get done. Seriously. It's a Lee and Associates initiative nationally. Is it a lot? I honestly don't know how many deals our office does in a year, but we plant a lot of trees. You know, we epitomize the song, we pave Paradise and put up a parking lot, right? I mean, whether it's retail or whether it's warehouse or whatever, unfortunately, that's the business that we tend to be in. But I see a lot of developers who work very hard at being as gentle with the earth as they possibly can. And really, there's some agencies who do good work, albeit slow, painstakingly slow, but agencies who do good work in the state of Pennsylvania, namely DEP and the county conservation districts, that really protect water quality. And again, I think they could do it faster and get to the same place, but they're doing good work, and it benefits the Chesapeake Bay. At the end of the day, it's really what it really does. So. I don't know if that was a passing grade on that answer or not.
That's a good answer.
Well, we've hit the end of class. So sorry, I know we had a couple more questions we didn't get to. But you have Bill's contact information, I think the first slide there.
Yeah, so I have business cards here if you want, so you can get in touch with me. I also have these really cool Lee & Associates cozies. They will work on both adult beverages and non-adult beverages, and they come with a bottle opener on the back. So this is not your standard run-of-the-mill 25-cent cozy. I'm betting these will probably went for 65 or 70 cents a piece. So be sure to take one of these with you. Yeah, all right.